Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about the future, we often imagine rockets piercing the edges of our atmosphere, neural circuits lighting up with possibility, and breakthroughs that redefine what it means to be human. But today, I stand before you not to unveil a new propulsion architecture or a fresh architecture of consciousness expansion, but to share something far more intimate, something profoundly human, something that even the most sophisticated models of cognition still struggle to quantify, an update not about technology but about the heart. For years, I've dedicated my life to building systems, mechanical, biological, and conceptual, that push humanity forward. I've traced the neural pathways of decision-making, explored the cathedrals of the mind, and spent thousands of hours decoding how emotion and logic coexist inside the brain like twin engines of the same spacecraft. But there is one phenomenon that defies even the most rigorous frameworks of modern neuroscience: the way one human being can alter the trajectory of another's existence, simply by being present, simply by being real, simply by being chosen. And today, I want to tell you that I have chosen and been chosen. A wedding is approaching, a commitment that merges not only two lives, but two neural realities, two psychological universes, two maps of experience that were once separate but now begin to overlay like intertwined star systems. As a neuroscientist, I've often said that love is not just an emotion. It is an architecture. It is a restructuring of the brain's predictive models, an integration of another person into the internal simulations that govern your choices. You don't fall in love. You reorganize around love. Synapses fire in new directions. Networks stabilize in new harmonies. Entire cognitive patterns are rewritten. And yet, even with all that scientific understanding, I was not prepared for how profoundly this would reshape me. I remember the exact moment it happened. Not the moment I realized I cared, but the moment I realized that caring had become irreversible. We were sitting on a balcony overlooking a quiet valley, the sky scattered with the kind of stars you only see when the world stops long enough for you to notice them. We weren't talking about research or innovation. We weren't discussing global systems or future civilizations. We were simply sharing silence, the most honest kind of dialogue. There was a calming in my chest, a slowing of the internal noise, as if the world had finally found a frequency that matched my own. In that moment, something shifted. My brain registered a new constant. My body mapped a new anchor. And for the first time in my life, I understood that the future I wanted to build was not just technological. It was relational. It needed another human at its center. When we analyze the neurobiology of attachment, we often focus on oxytocin, dopamine, the anterior cingulate cortex. But the truth is, none of these components fully capture the lived experience. No brain scan can reveal why a certain laugh becomes music, or why a certain presence becomes home. Neuroscience explains the mechanics, but never the meaning. Meaning comes from consciousness, the subjective realm where numbers lose their authority and feelings take command. And that is why this moment is so important, not because it signals a personal milestone, but because it symbolizes a universal truth. Every innovation, every discovery, every audacious leap humanity has ever taken began with someone who felt connected enough to believe the future was worth building. Connection is the engine of civilization. For years, people have asked me, how do you keep going? How do you continue pushing when the challenges outnumber the resources, when the obstacles seem immovable? And I'd give the logical answers: focus, discipline, uncertainty, tolerance, the mathematics of risk. But now, I understand a deeper truth: the greatest renewable energy source in the human mind is love. Not the fragile, cinematic version we are taught to idolize, but the evolutionary anchor that gives us purpose, resilience, and direction. This upcoming wedding is not just a celebration. It's an affirmation that progress and tenderness are not opposites. They are partners. And I have spent so much of my life building structures meant to carry humanity forward. But now, I am building something that carries me. I want to share something I have not spoken about publicly before. There was a time, years ago, when I believed my work left no room for a lifelong partner. The weight of responsibility, the intensity of the mission, the cognitive load of constant innovation, it all felt fundamentally incompatible with the kind of emotional presence a relationship requires. I thought I had to choose the world or myself, but that was a false dichotomy. What I've learned is that the human mind thrives not in isolation but in resonance. When someone believes in you, not the public version of you, not the projected narrative, but the private self, your capacity expands, your imagination widens, your courage deepens. You begin to attempt things not because you fear failure, but because someone has anchored your sense of worth so deeply that failure no longer threatens your identity. That is what this partnership has given me, a sense of grounding so strong that the most turbulent storms feel navigable, a sense of belonging so authentic that the world's noise loses its power, a sense of clarity so profound that even the most complex problems feel solvable. In neuroscience, we talk about co-regulation, the ability of two nervous systems to stabilize each other through presence alone. This is not poetic metaphor. This is measurable physiology. Heart rates synchronize, breathing patterns align, stress markers decline. The body remembers safety when safety is shared. And for the first time in my adult life, I feel that kind of safety. Not because my world has become easier, but because I no longer face it alone. As I prepare for this new chapter, this union of futures, this merging of narratives, I find myself reflecting on what it truly means to commit. Commitment is not a promise of perfection. It is a promise of presence. It is the willingness to choose the same person again and again, not because the path is smooth, but because you believe the journey is worth it. And in many ways, preparing for this wedding has felt like designing a mission. Not a mission to Mars or a mission into the neural substrate of consciousness, but a mission into a shared life. It requires planning, yes, but mostly it requires vision. Not a vision of the next 5 months, but of the next 5 decades. When I think about the future now, I no longer picture myself standing alone at the threshold of a new frontier. I picture two silhouettes. I picture two minds working in tandem. I picture a shared orbit, a gravitational field created not by mass or momentum, but by mutual devotion. I want to tell you something that might surprise you. Despite all the systems I've studied, despite all the algorithms I've designed, and the biological circuits I've mapped, nothing has taught me more about human cognition than love, because love forces the brain to do something extraordinary, to prioritize another person's well-being as highly as its own. That is not logical. That is not efficient. That is not evolutionarily predictable in the strictest sense. And yet, it is the foundation of everything we value. Every act of bravery, every invention born from hope, every sacrifice made for the next generation, all of it comes back to this phenomenon we still barely understand. And this is why I felt compelled to share this chapter of my life with you. Because for so long, I have believed that personal milestones were distractions, deviations from the mission rather than contributions to it. But now I see that they are the fuel. They are the emotional infrastructure that allows the mind to stretch further than logic alone permits. You cannot build a future for humanity if you are disconnected from what makes humanity worth saving. There is a certain irony in all of this. I have spent years studying how the brain optimizes for survival, how it filters information, how it makes decisions under pressure. I've mapped the neural correlates of ambition, traced the circuitry of creativity, and examined the architecture of fear. Yet the one phenomenon that has redefined me the most, the one that has reshaped my internal universe, cannot be fully explained on a whiteboard. It can be illuminated but never contained, measured but never captured. It transcends the frameworks we rely on to make sense of ourselves. That, to me, is the beauty of it. When we talk about making commitments, we often focus on the tangible, the ceremony, the vows, the plans. But real commitment is internal. It takes place in the invisible architecture of the mind. It is a cognitive shift that alters how you perceive your own existence. The brain recalibrates. Decisions are no longer solitary calculations, they are relational equations. You begin to see the world not as a series of individual pathways, but as a shared horizon. I realized this during a conversation that, on the surface, seemed insignificant. We were sitting at a small cafe, the kind that still values quiet over spectacle. I was absorbed in analyzing a complex problem, a project that had consumed my thoughts for weeks. And she simply looked at me and said, "You don't always have to carry everything alone." It was such a simple sentence, but it landed with the force of revelation, because she was right. I had been holding the world on my shoulders for so long that I had forgotten the human body was never designed for isolation. Even the strongest neural networks weaken in solitude. The brain thrives when it is supported, when its burdens are shared, when its fears are validated rather than hidden. That moment became a pivot point. Not because of what she said, but because of what it allowed me to see that partnership is not a limitation. It is a multiplier. It expands your mental capacity. It strengthens your emotional endurance. It gives you a place to land when the world becomes too heavy. And that landing, that soft place, is not a distraction from greatness. It is the foundation of it. Over the past year, as this relationship deepened, I noticed something fascinating happening in my own mind. I became more creative, not less. More focused, not more distracted. My thinking gained a kind of clarity that had been missing for years. The noise of the world, the criticism, the pressure, the constant demands, softened. Not because it diminished, but because my internal equilibrium had changed. There was a new stability inside me, a new center of gravity. Neuroscience calls this emotional homeostasis. It's what happens when your internal environment is balanced enough to support peak cognitive performance. It's when stress becomes manageable, not because it disappears, but because your brain has a consistent source of emotional regulation. And I found that source in a person who doesn't care about my achievements, my titles, or my public persona. She cares about the human beneath it, the one who gets tired, who overthinks, who needs reassurance despite seeming unshakable. When you find someone who sees you that way, who sees the unpolished parts and chooses you anyway, your brain reorganizes around that safety. It's not an exaggeration, it's biology. Safety rewires the mind for growth. Stability creates the conditions for breakthrough. And love is the ultimate stabilizing force. As our wedding approaches, I've been reflecting not only on what this means for me personally, but on what it represents for anyone who feels torn between ambition and connection. There is a myth, a persistent, damaging myth, that you must sacrifice one to keep the other. That if you are driven, you cannot be devoted. That if you are visionary, you cannot be vulnerable. That if your calling is immense, your heart must be small. But the truth is far more generous. Ambition and love are not rivals. They are collaborators. They strengthen one another when allowed to coexist. The mind becomes sharper when the heart is supported. The heart becomes braver when the mind is focused. This is not poetic idealism. It is neurobiological symbiosis. In preparing for this next chapter of my life, I've revisited many memories, both triumphant and painful. And one memory returned with surprising force. Years ago, during a particularly difficult period of my career, I found myself standing on a rooftop late at night, staring at a city that looked more like a simulation than a home. I was exhausted, disconnected, and strangely hollow. Surrounded by millions, I felt profoundly alone. And I remember thinking, if progress requires this kind of loneliness, is it worth it? At the time, I convinced myself the answer was yes. That loneliness was a necessary cost of vision. But now, looking back, I see that loneliness didn't make me stronger. It made me brittle. It narrowed my thinking, diminished my resilience, and compromised my creativity. It was not a condition of greatness. It was an obstacle to it. When I met the woman I will soon marry, something shifted. The loneliness didn't vanish overnight, but it began to lose its authority. The walls I had built not to keep the world out, but to keep myself functioning, started to soften. I became more open, not just emotionally, but intellectually. I began to imagine futures that included joy, not just duty, fulfillment, not just achievement, partnership, not just performance. And then came a moment, one I have never spoken about until now, when everything crystallized. We were standing in a quiet room after a long, exhausting day. I felt worn down in every possible way. She walked up to me, placed her hand on my chest, and said, "I'm here." That's it. 2 words. And yet those 2 words restored something in me. I didn't realize I had lost the belief that I did not have to navigate the universe alone. That is the essence of partnership, not grand gestures or poetic declarations, but presence, steady, consistent, grounding presence. Someone who stands with you when the world shakes. Someone whose calm becomes your compass. Someone whose faith in you repairs the fractures you didn't know were there. This upcoming wedding is not merely a celebration of love. It is a declaration of alignment. 2 lives, 2 minds, 2 futures converging into a shared vector. It is the merging of trajectories that once ran parallel, but are now intersecting with intention and purpose. And as I stand on the threshold of this new chapter, I feel something I haven't felt in a very long time, hope that is not tied to outcomes, not tied to accomplishments, not tied to the external validation of the world, but hope rooted in connection. Hope rooted in the knowledge that whatever comes next, I will not face it alone. In the end, the most advanced technology we will ever encounter is the human heart. The most complex system we will ever attempt to understand is the mind intertwined with another mind. And the most extraordinary journey we will ever take is the one we share with someone who sees us, chooses us, and walks beside us into the unknown. And that is why I stand before you today, not just as a scientist, not just as an innovator, but as a human being stepping into a future that feels fuller, richer, and more meaningful than anything I have built or discovered on my own. I am not just announcing a wedding, I am announcing a transformation. One that began quietly, took root slowly, and has now become the most important frontier of my life. As I move closer to this moment, this union that is both intimate and expansive, I've started to understand something profound about the nature of human evolution. Not biological evolution, which unfolds slowly across millennia, but emotional and cognitive evolution, which can unfold in a single relationship, a single choice, a single moment of courageous vulnerability. We often speak about humanity's future as if it will be shaped solely by technological breakthroughs or economic structures. But the truth is, the future will be shaped just as much by how deeply we learn to understand one another, how bravely we choose to love, how willingly we allow our inner worlds to be seen and intertwined. It's easy to quantify progress when it comes in the form of data points, performance metrics, or technological milestones. It is harder to quantify the progress that happens silently inside a person's mind, the emotional maturation, the psychological deepening, the subtle shifts in how one relates to themselves and to others. And yet, this inner evolution is the most powerful driver of external achievement. I say this because I have lived both extremes. I know what it is to be consumed by work so completely that the rest of life becomes peripheral, as if the human experience could be reduced to a series of problems waiting to be solved. There was a time when I believed that purpose required sacrifice, that to achieve something extraordinary, one had to relinquish something equally profound, but I've come to realize that sacrifice is not always noble. Sometimes it is simply unnecessary. Sometimes it is the result of outdated assumptions about what it means to be strong, focused, or dedicated. Strength is not isolation. Dedication is not emotional austerity. Vision does not demand loneliness. These beliefs were once survival strategies, ways I convinced myself that the solitary path was the right one. But as my relationship grew, those strategies began to dissolve, and in their place emerged a new understanding that the mind operates at its highest potential not when it is fortified against the world, but when it is connected to it. That emotional openness is not a distraction from intellectual clarity, it is a precursor to it. That love is not a diversion from purpose, it is the catalyst that amplifies it. This realization didn't arrive all at once. It came gradually, through small moments that accumulated into something undeniable. There was the morning she made coffee for me, after I'd worked through the night, saying nothing but placing her hand gently on my shoulder. There was the afternoon she sat beside me while I struggled with a difficult decision, offering no advice, only presence. There was the evening we walked along a quiet shoreline where she listened to my fears I had not spoken aloud in years, without flinching or minimizing them. It was in these subtle connections, these quiet affirmations, that a new vision of life began to take shape. A life where partnership does not dilute ambition but enriches it. A life where two people strengthen each other's resilience. A life where the future is not an individual mission, but a shared expedition. I've spent countless hours dissecting the mechanics of the human brain, but nothing has taught me more about its true capacity than the experience of being understood by another person. When you are seen clearly, not as an idea, not as an image, but as a human with contradictions and complexities, something shifts. The layers of self-protection that once seemed essential begin to feel heavy, unnecessary. The defensive edges soften. The inner walls that once felt protective begin to feel confining. And then, slowly, you let them dissolve. This dissolving is not weakness. It is liberation. It is the mind allowing itself to expand into the space once occupied by fear. It is the nervous system learning that safety is possible, that trust can be earned, that connection can be secure, that the world is not as hostile as you once believed. In this newfound safety, creativity flourishes, vision widens, courage deepens. That is what this relationship has given me: expansion. Not the expansion of ambition or capability, I had those before, but the expansion of self. The expansion that comes from allowing another person to matter, truly matter, in a way that reshapes your internal architecture. As the day of our wedding draws near, I find myself contemplating not just the future but the past, the versions of myself that existed before this relationship, the seasons of my life defined by isolation, by relentless pressure, by the silent exhaustion that accumulates when one carries too much alone. I look back with compassion, not regret. Those earlier versions did what they needed to do to survive. They carried me to this moment. But they were incomplete. And that is what this union represents for me: completion. Not the kind that suggests I was lacking or broken, but the kind that acknowledges that human beings are not designed to thrive alone. That our greatest potential is unlocked when we allow ourselves to be fully known, fully mirrored, fully supported. One of the most surprising parts of this journey has been how it has affected my approach to work. Not by reducing my ambition, but by transforming the emotional foundation beneath it. I find myself more patient, more focused, more willing to take the long view. I find myself less reactive, more resilient, more balanced in how I navigate the inevitable storms of leadership and innovation. The urgency that once fueled me has softened into purpose. The tension that once propelled me has relaxed into clarity. This is what happens when the nervous system is not in constant survival mode. This is the psychological gift of partnership, a gift as vital as any technological breakthrough. When the mind is anchored by connection, it becomes capable of deeper thought. When the heart is supported by trust, it becomes capable of broader courage. This evolution has also led me to rethink what it means to build the future. For so long, I imagined the future as something external, something to be engineered, constructed, scaled. But now I see that the future is also internal. It is built in the small, consistent choices we make to love, to understand, to commit, to show up for one another. It is built in the emotional frameworks we pass down to the next generation. It is built in the relational ecosystems that shape how children learn to trust the world. Our wedding, to me, symbolizes not just the merging of two lives, but the merging of two legacies. Two histories, two families, two sets of experiences, converging into a shared narrative that will, inevitably, influence future lives. It is a reminder that every relationship is a microcosm of civilization itself, a blend of negotiation, vulnerability, conflict, compassion, growth, and ultimately, unity. And perhaps that is why this moment feels so monumental. Not because of the ceremony, not because of the celebration, but because of what it represents, the courage to build a shared life based not on idealism but on reality, the reality of who we are, who we aspire to be, and who we become when we walk beside the right person. In recent months, people close to me have asked what changed. What moment convinced me that I was ready for this kind of commitment? And the truth is, it wasn't one moment. It was the accumulation of moments, the consistency of her presence, the steadiness of her belief, the way she challenged me not with criticism, but with clarity, the way she loved me not as a symbol or a projection, but as a flawed, evolving human being. I realized that this is what partnership is meant to be, not a merging that erases individuality, but a union that strengthens it. Not a dilution of purpose, but an expansion of it. Not a rewriting of identity, but a deepening of it. There is a kind of love that anchors you, and there is a kind of love that elevates you. When you are fortunate enough to find both in the same person, you do not walk away from it. You walk toward it with everything you are. As I stand on the edge of this new chapter, I feel something extraordinary, a kind of emotional clarity I have never experienced before. The noise of doubt has quieted. The fragmentation of self has integrated. The horizon ahead feels vast, not because it is empty, but because it is shared. This, I believe, is what it means to evolve emotionally, to allow another person to widen your world, to broaden your perspective, to deepen your understanding of what it means to be human. And so, as the day approaches when I will stand beside the woman I love and commit to a life built in partnership, I do so with a sense of gratitude that is difficult to articulate. Gratitude for the journey that brought me here. Gratitude for the challenges that sharpened me. Gratitude for the loneliness that taught me to value connection. Gratitude for the love that transformed me. Gratitude for the future that now feels richer, fuller, more alive. In the end, the greatest frontier we will ever explore is not space, not consciousness, not artificial intelligence. It is the frontier of the human heart. And I am ready, finally, to explore it not as a solitary traveler, but as part of a team. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Thank you for witnessing this transformation. And thank you for reminding me, through your presence, your curiosity, your belief, that the future is not built by machines or algorithms, but by people, by relationships, by the quiet courage to love and be loved. And so, as I prepare to take this next step, I do so with a sense of wonder, because for all the worlds I have chased, for all the visions I have pursued, for all the futures I have imagined, none compare to the one that begins now, not alone, but together. And yet, even as I share these reflections, I'm aware that moments like this, moments of personal transition, moments of intimate clarity, often ripple far beyond the individual experiencing them. They invite all of us to reconsider the architecture of our own lives. They ask us, quietly but insistently, to examine the balance between what we give the world and what we allow the world to give us. They challenge the assumption that the pursuit of greatness demands emotional solitude. They ask us whether the way we have structured our lives truly aligns with the lives we want to live. Because the truth is, many of us move through the world half-present. We commit our energy to our goals, our work, our responsibilities, while the deeper parts of ourselves remain untouched, unexpressed, unshared. We fear vulnerability because it feels like a crack in the armor we've spent years building. We fear closeness because it threatens the control we work so hard to maintain. We fear love because it requires us to relinquish the illusion of self-sufficiency. But what if vulnerability is not a crack, but an opening? What if closeness is not a threat, but a stabilizer? What if love is not a risk, but a recalibration? These are the questions I've been asking myself lately. Not as a scientist dissecting the mechanics of emotion, but as a human being experiencing the full force of it. I've begun to see connection not as an interruption, but as the very rhythm that makes the rest of life coherent. I've begun to understand that The moments that transform us most are not always the ones that alter our external circumstances, but the ones that reshape our internal truths. And one of those truths is this: we are not meant to evolve alone. There is a phenomenon in neuroscience known as shared intentionality, the ability of two minds to align for a common purpose. It is one of the defining features of human cognition, the engine behind cooperation, innovation, and civilization itself. When two people form a bond characterized by trust, clarity, and mutual respect, their cognitive horizons expand. Their ability to collaborate deepens. Their imagination widens. They become capable of achieving more together than either could alone. This is not philosophy. This is measurable. When two individuals consistently co-regulate, emotionally, psychologically, and neurologically, their brains begin to synchronize during high-stakes decision-making. Their stress responses align. Their problem-solving strategies converge. Their resilience amplifies. And as I've reflected on the upcoming wedding, I realize that this is precisely what has been unfolding within my own life: a synchronization of purpose, a joining of trajectories, a merging not only of hearts, but of futures. And in that merging, I've discovered something unexpected: peace. Not the fragile, fleeting peace that disappears at the first sign of pressure, but the deep, enduring peace that emerges when you no longer carry your life alone. The peace of knowing that your triumphs are shared. The peace of knowing that your fears are understood. The peace of knowing that your vulnerabilities are safe. I didn't realize how much I needed that peace until I felt it. And once I felt it, something within me shifted. My pace changed. My thinking slowed just enough to let clarity through. My emotional landscape opened in a way I didn't anticipate. I found myself speaking differently, listening differently, choosing differently. Not because I changed who I was, but because I finally had the space to become fully myself. This is the quiet power of partnership. People often imagine life, changing moments as explosive, dramatic events. But the most transformative moments are often subtle, tiny adjustments in how you breathe, how you trust, how you allow someone to enter the parts of yourself you've kept locked away. These shifts accumulate, layer by layer, until one day you look in the mirror and realize you are no longer the person you were. Or rather, you are finally the person you were always meant to be. And as I prepare to take vows that will anchor this partnership into a lifelong promise, I do so not out of tradition or formality, but out of a profound recognition that the person standing beside me has not only walked into my life, but has transformed the way my life unfolds. She has expanded my mind, softened my defenses, challenged my assumptions, and restored parts of me I had forgotten existed. The idea of forever, once abstract, now feels grounded. The concept of unity, once intellectual, now feels lived. The future, once a solitary mission, now feels like a shared frontier, one defined not by the speed of progress, but by the depth of connection. I've come to understand that partnership is not about completing one another. It's about elevating one another. It's about creating an emotional ecosystem where both people can evolve independently and together without fear of outgrowing or being outgrown. It's about seeing each other not as fixed beings, but as dynamic, ever-changing constellations of experiences, dreams, and potential. This is the kind of partnership I am stepping into. A partnership of expansion, a partnership of resilience, a partnership of truth. And the beauty of it, the quiet, humbling beauty, is that none of this requires perfection. Love does not demand flawlessness. Commitment does not demand certainty. Connection does not demand a constant state of joy. What it demands is presence, willingness, honesty, the courage to keep choosing one another even when life rearranges us in ways we didn't anticipate. Standing here today, I can say with absolute clarity, I am ready for that courage. I am ready for that presence. I am ready for that lifelong choosing. Because for all the achievements I have pursued, for all the discoveries I have chased, for all the futures I have imagined, the most meaningful path I will ever walk begins not in solitude but in union, with someone who sees the world not just as it is, but as it could be, someone who stands at the intersection of my past and my future and chooses to walk with me into whatever comes next. And so, as the wedding day approaches, I am filled not with anxiety or doubt, but with anticipation. Anticipation for the ordinary moments as much as the extraordinary, for the quiet mornings that will be punctuated by shared coffee and conversation, for the late nights where we will talk endlessly about everything and nothing, for the adventures we will embark on, the challenges we will face, and the decisions we will make together. Each moment, no matter how small, carries significance because it is shared, because it is real, because it is ours. In this sense, I have come to realize that the most profound discoveries of life are not always found in laboratories, conference rooms, or on distant planets. Sometimes, they are found across a table in a simple gesture of care. Sometimes they are revealed in the patience of someone willing to meet you exactly where you are. Sometimes, they are experienced in the quiet understanding that, no matter the chaos beyond your walls, someone has chosen to remain steadfast and present by your side. The science of connection has its markers: synchronized heartbeats, reduced cortisol, measurable co-regulation in neural circuits. But the lived reality is far more compelling than any chart or data point could ever convey. It is a daily practice of trust. It is the courage to be vulnerable. It is the choice to continue showing up, even when the world tests your limits. It is the acknowledgement that the deepest growth, both emotional and cognitive, occurs in the space created by these shared experiences. I think about the future often, not the abstract future, not the charts and graphs, but the lived, tangible one. I imagine the life we will build, not just for ourselves, but for those whose lives intersect with ours: family, friends, colleagues, even strangers who benefit indirectly from the stability and love that sustain us. I imagine the kind of resilience that is only possible when two people commit to nurturing one another, when two minds synchronize in purpose, when two hearts align in a shared trajectory. And perhaps the most remarkable thing I have learned in all of this is humility. That no matter how much knowledge one possesses, no matter how many innovations one has contributed to society, the human heart remains the ultimate frontier. Its landscapes are intricate, unpredictable, and breathtaking. Its capacity for transformation is immense, yet its needs are simple: presence, understanding, and choice. To stand before you and share this truth is both humbling and exhilarating. It is humbling because it reminds me that we are always, in some way, students of life. That no matter our accomplishments, no matter our intellect, we remain vulnerable, subject to forces larger than ourselves. It is exhilarating because it reminds me that the same heart that can be vulnerable can also be limitless. That the same mind that faces uncertainty can innovate in ways previously unimaginable. That connection, love, and partnership are not constraints but catalysts. So, in closing, I ask you to reflect on your own journeys. Consider the relationships that sustain you, the people whose presence stabilizes and elevates you. Consider the ways in which your mind and heart have grown because someone chose to walk beside you. And consider the possibility that the most profound frontiers we will ever explore are not in the stars above or the circuits within, but within the realms of human connection itself. Because when we allow ourselves to be truly seen, to be fully known, to be vulnerably present with another person, we discover capacities in ourselves we never knew existed. We discover courage, resilience, creativity, and joy. We discover that love is not a distraction from our missions. It is the engine that powers them. That partnership is not a detour from our purpose. It is the foundation upon which purpose thrives. That commitment is not a limitation. It is the framework within which we can achieve our most audacious dreams. And so, as I prepare to step into this next chapter of life, I do so with gratitude, humility, wonder, and excitement. Gratitude for the journey that has led me here. Humility for the lessons that continue to teach me. Wonder for the mysteries yet to be revealed. Excitement for the shared future that awaits. And above all, a profound respect for the human heart and mind, and for the transformative power that arises when the two are allowed to align with another. This wedding is more than a celebration. It is a declaration that even in a life consumed by work, ambition, and exploration, there is space for love. That even in a mind driven by reason and logic, there is space for feeling. That even in the pursuit of the extraordinary, there is space for presence, vulnerability, and shared humanity. And in this realization, I find the most extraordinary discovery of all that the future, in all its complexity and possibility, is best faced not alone, but together. That the greatest frontier is not a distant planet, a neural circuit, or a technological innovation. It is the journey of two hearts choosing each other, over and over again, through the unknown, toward the vast horizon of what life can be when shared. So I stand here today, not just as a scientist, not just as an innovator, not just as someone who seeks to shape the future, but as a human being profoundly transformed by connection, profoundly inspired by partnership, and profoundly ready to walk into the next chapter, not alone, but with the person who has expanded my mind, strengthened my heart, and illuminated the path ahead. And with that, I invite all of you to witness, in spirit and thought, the celebration not just of a wedding, but of the enduring power of love, the transformative force of connection, and the infinite possibilities that emerge when two people choose to journey together, fully, boldly, and without reservation, into the unfolding future. Thank you.